Welcome to the Craftsman Founder Podcast, hosted by Lucas Carlson. Every week, we talk to founders, entrepreneurs, and those who've made a craft out of creating companies and enterprises. Listen every week to get ideas for starting, promoting, and growing your business. There are no shortcuts, just good old-fashioned hard work and craft. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's interview.
Hello, this is Lucas Carlson from the Craftsman Founder Podcast. This week, I have an awesome guest. Now, this is not just a guest. This is a deep friend of mine. This is somebody that I've built a relationship with, and he means a lot to me. I'm really, can't tell you how excited I am to spend some time with him and pick his brain, because this is Frank Artale. Frank Artale is not just an awesome dude. He has a background, a pedigree that is impeccable. He's done amazing stuff. I'll let him tell you about his work with Microsoft. He's founded and been part of the founding team of companies that have done amazing work as well, that very well-known name brand companies you've heard of. I'll let him tell you about that too. But now he's actually a venture capitalist, and his claim to fame for this podcast right now is that this guy is the guy that helped me grow AppFog. So he was one of the big investors. We raised $10 million in AppFog, and we were acquired by CenturyLink. And this is one of the big brains. He was on my board of directors, and he's been not just an awesome venture capitalist, but he has been a mentor to me. He has taught me so much about the business, and I'd love to spend a little time picking his brain so that you can learn some of the great stuff he's taught me over the years. So, Frank, thank you for being on. And
glad to be here.
I appreciate your time.
So it's really hard to hear so many accolades about yourself. So someday I'll do that for you, so you can see what it's like.
Oh boy, yeah. No thanks. Yeah. So, can you tell us about your background?
Yeah, Lucas. So this is the I started my 30th year on the technology business. It actually gets hard to say that. I got started in 1984, so you can say the start of the 30th year or the start of the 31st, depending upon how you count, starting with 0 or 1. But spent pretty much the first half of my career in software development. I started out working on financial trader workstation systems in the 1980s, so I cut my teeth on early versions of Unix, Sonos, also digital equipment systems, and IBM OS2 and Microsoft Windows. And then in 1991, I actually joined Microsoft as the group program manager for Windows NT Workstation. And actually before that at Microsoft, I worked in the consulting organization, but moved to Redmond in 1994 on the Windows NT Workstation project, and worked on 4 releases of Windows NT. So the last release I shipped was Windows 2000, and I was a general manager on the Windows 2000 project. So I learned a lot while I was at Microsoft. I'll say it was a decade that went in a blur. And I feel like we learned back then in a month what sometimes it would take a year to learn back then on the outside. Business moved slower then, but at places like Microsoft and our cohort at the time, places like Netscape as an example, were really changing the pace of business, of the software business. I left Microsoft after that tenure and decided I really wanted to learn more about smaller companies. So I made a quick stop at Veritas Software, where I worked for 2 years, and really to learn more about the enterprise software business. And Microsoft, at the time I was there, we went from being a packaged goods business to the beginnings of an enterprise business. But places like Veritas were only enterprise, and I really wanted to learn more about that. And I helped get the Windows business organized there, and then decided to really get into a startup scenario. And I started my first company in 2002, Concera Software, that was sold to HP 2 years later. A very small outcome, but for those of you that were around in 2002, venture funding was hard to come by, and a quick exit was certainly an interesting thing and a really new experience for me. And so from there, I decided to work with some of the folks that funded me, and I joined the venture capital community. I started working at Accel Partners on the venture development team. And soon after doing that, as being an advisor to a number of companies, I settled in with one of the companies that I was advising on behalf of Accel, and that was ZenSource. And I went on at ZenSource as chief operating officer, and we brought that company to a transaction with Citrix Systems in just a short number of years. And then while at Citrix, I ran business development on a worldwide basis for the 3 years that I was there. So that was drawn back into the venture capital community after Citrix, and I actually became a general partner at Ignition, where that's when we met. I met Lucas at a startup beauty pageant in the Bay Area, and
under the radar.
Under the radar, and I immediately pulled him aside and said, "I want to invest in your company," and we got to know each other. Then it was my first, I would just say, investment that I went and found on my own, and it was certainly an adventure. And we were early investors in platform as a service at Ignition. We were investors in Heroku, and we liked the pattern. We still believe in platform as a service, and we believe that it will become the de facto way that software is developed in enterprises and for consumer internet. And so it's a long way to go in that area. But since joining Ignition, I've largely been investing in infrastructure technologies and in big data. So my largest investment is in Cloudera. I also invest in security companies like Bromium Systems, additional platform as a service on the enterprise side, companies like Apprenda. We're just super excited about all the things that are happening in enterprise software, and we see enterprise software really in a renaissance, not only from perspective of the kind of things that vendors will sell to enterprises, but enterprises themselves at software companies, and we can talk more about that later on.
That's awesome.
So in a nutshell, 30 years. It's gone quick, and I'm ready for the next 30.
Well, it's a very impressive background. So
yeah. I've even fixed my hair today to be a little bit more like Lucas, so it was an effort.
It looks good.
Yeah. What hair is left, that is, of course.
So my first question for you is, what do you see in entrepreneurs that separate from the pack? What do you see about great entrepreneurs that is different from the other ones?
Yeah, so when we look at entrepreneurs and teams in general, we look at, first of all, you like an entrepreneur that has done it once or twice before. And so a first-time entrepreneur is almost all about energy and raw talent, like a big brain. But if we say, okay, an entrepreneur that we like, has the person done it before? Has the person made some mistakes? What have they learned from that? And then being very forthright about what they learned during that process. We have one company in our portfolio today where it's the CEO's 6th startup, and it's by far his most successful one. Now, just because you do a successful one in the past or fail in the past doesn't mean you're going to be great in the future. So that's just from a pattern match. The thing that we really look for, though, are for people that are good listeners. And if you can't be a good listener with your investor, can you imagine how the person would be a listener with a customer? And we love opinions, because customers love opinions. Customers want to be prescribed. They want to be told. They want to understand your passion, and you can't show that without an opinion. But listening is super important, and so we really like that. And then we also like people that understand their own weaknesses. So you shouldn't come to us and say that you're great at everything. You don't need any help, right? Tell us what help you're going to need, because we have to feel like we're adding some value as well. And then of course being a domain expert. Right, so if you're an entrepreneur and you're going to come to us and you came out of maybe building a hypervisor, but suddenly you want to build a game, say, well, you might be passionate about games, but you really know hypervisors. So why don't you do something around hypervisors? And so those are the kind of things we really look for. But passion is and passion as an overlay to that is critical. No one wants to hang around with someone who feels like they're crawling into a position or a job. We want someone who's so passionate about it that they're consumed by what they're doing.
What do you think an entrepreneur should do if they haven't had kind of success under the belt? So they're trying to do their first company, and they kind of feel like it's a catch-22. The investors are looking for somebody seasoned, but they have all this passion, but they feel like everybody wants them to have done it before. What's your advice to somebody like that?
Yeah, so in terms of a first-time entrepreneur, we really encourage people to team up with at least one or two people that have been involved in startups before.
Makes sense.
So at least this way, when you're in a room, you can say you're not having a meeting just with yourself.
Yep.
Right? There's other people you can draw from. And sometimes the entrepreneurs will come to us and say, hey, well, you guys can provide that expertise, but we can't be there all the time. And that's also the thing that an entrepreneur should understand. We actually don't work at the company. By definition, our work is advisory, and so we do encourage people to team up. But even if they can't team up, if you can really prove that what you're doing is something that's completely unique, and you are the best and only person to go define that, then you do have a fighting chance.
Makes sense. What's the biggest misconception you think entrepreneurs have about investors?
Okay, so first of all, investors are not evil. So that's again, I like to put that as the biggest misconception. But also we are hands-on. We're not just money. So sometimes we get a conversation with the entrepreneurs, assuming that we're just going to write a check and then not come back. We actually do work hand in hand. And that's not to say that all classes of investors are like that. But early stage investors better be hands-on. They better be working side by side with you. The other thing I think that's a bit of a misconception is that we're not patient. So we are in fact very patient. So when we invest in a company, we're investing in a company with the intent of building something that, in our words, in the investment venture capital world, can return our entire fund. And what that means, let's say we own 20% of a company and our fund is $150 million, so we'd like that 20% ownership stake to be able to be worth $150 million.
Yep.
Right? So that doesn't happen in a quarter or a year or 2 years or 3 years. Those are things that happen over 5 to 7 to 10 years. And so we are actually a lot more patient than most people would think.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, when they don't understand how venture capital works, they don't even realize that a venture capitalist is probably not going to invest in an idea that can't be worth hundreds of or billions of dollars in the future. It's just not, they have to be able to return the fund.
Correct. It's what we do for a living. And so in fact, I think what people need to understand is that as venture capital investors, we really don't get paid. We don't share in any of what people see as these massive outcomes until all of the money that we've taken as a commitment to our fund is actually returned to our investors. Right? And so that's why when you hear us talk about going big and thinking big, it's because the outcomes have to be big for it to matter.
Got it. What do you think what do you wish that more entrepreneurs knew?
Yeah, I wish more entrepreneurs knew. I wish I could actually take my brain sometimes and hand it to an entrepreneur for at least a couple of hours just to see the kind of mistakes that at least that I've been able to witness. And I think one of the things that most entrepreneurs have not witnessed or known are the mistakes. And when I was working with Dave Cutler on Windows NT, he was many years senior to me then, and he says he would tell me that the experience that you get from mistakes, right, it can be far more instructive than the experience you get from success. And I just really encourage people, to think about things that didn't work and really make that part of their memory on a day-to-day basis. And the problem with mistakes is that because they can be painful, you tend to want to forget them and to really just remember them. And I know maybe it's not a sexy thing to say remember your mistakes, or people say learn from them, but they really have to become part of what you do. And then celebrate your successes, right? And those are important. And then the final thing I would say I wish more entrepreneurs knew how to do was give credit. I hear far too many people saying the word I. Right? I is a great thing, right? Because I did this, I did that, I invented something. But I really love it when I'm meeting with a small team of people and they talk about how great a thing was that somebody on the team did or some advisor told them. And more of the giving credit, I think, it breeds a culture of credit. And it makes for great teams, mm-hmm. And teams are what's super important in this. At least early on, the team building and the team composition, and then having the teams beget other teams. And you can't do that without a culture of sharing success.
Makes sense. How do you pick a team? How do you find a great team to work with? Because I know a lot of entrepreneurs that are have been told you need a co-founder, and they kind of go out and they find well, I need somebody, so I'm going to grab the first smart person that will jump ship with me. How do you go about? Is there a strategy for building a team? Yeah, in terms of team building, I would say I wish there was a formula or a playbook we can go find. And I'll be quite honest, most of the time the best teams that come to us, are together for a reason. Maybe we look at things. We say, all right, how well does this founding CEO and this founding CTO, how well do they know each other? Have they been through tough times, right? And so I love to have teams of people where they came through tough times together. You can't always get that. And so when you have a team that has no experience, then you really want to understand how they did come together. Mm-hmm. Having us force a team together is generally not successful. You like to see the teams come together through some sort of magnetism and attraction to each other.
And if each team member can't express why they were drawn to the rest of the team, then it's probably not going to be a great team.
Yeah.
The other thing we look at in terms of teams and the importance of teams is that in general, now it's not an absolute case, but in general, a great team has at least a chance of building a great product and becoming a great company. It's pretty rare where you start out with a mediocre team that ends up producing a great product and becoming a great company. And so the importance of that team and the dynamics there can't be understated.
So you can have a great team and a mediocre product, but a great product and a mediocre team is not as good a combination.
It's a much less likely scenario.
Got it.
Yeah, mediocre team producing a great product is less likely than great team producing great product. Doesn't not to say that a great team always produces a great product, but at least the probabilities are there for it.
Yep. Why did you become a venture capitalist?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me that. So 3 years ago, a little more than 3 years ago, when I was finishing up my time at Citrix Systems, I had some opportunities to go back into the startup world. I could have went and done an executive in residence, maybe pick a company to go join, small, medium, or large. But what I came to realize during my time at Citrix, running business development, that job enabled me to manage a portfolio for the first time. And for the first time, I had what I felt were like hundreds of constituent companies that were really small software companies that wanted a relationship with Citrix. And I never really had that before, and I found out I really liked it. I liked managing a lot of initiatives with a lot of different companies all at once. That was a bit different. You have hundreds of companies, but you also have a staff, you have 5 or 6 people that are helping you, and also manage relationships with large caps like Microsoft as an example. But I like the notion of that. And so I sat and thought, well, what is it I can do that allows me to work with some great young entrepreneurs? And of course, the logical answer was becoming a venture capital investor. And it really is rewarding. So like we got to meet during that period of time. And one of the great things for me as someone who's been around the industry a long time is really being able to see people grow during the process. And I used to joke with people and say, like, the thing I really love about working with startups is the fact that maybe I can get involved in a startup where in a place where no one in the company has, let's say a secure future. People are still living hand to mouth, they're working for a paycheck, and I always like to think that at least when I get done with that company, to bring it to a natural outcome, that there's at least a few people in the organization that have had a life-changing positive event as a result. And whatever that means is different. Whatever that is different for different people, whether someone's ended up paid off a mortgage or has their college educations for their children taken care of, or maybe just bought a new car. And so I take pride in that and really think about the teams and think about, for each person on those teams, what that life-changing event is going to be. And for every company, it's going to be different. Sometimes you have a very wealthy founder, for whom becoming really, really wealthy is what they're after, and that's a different sort of outcome. But everyone is motivated by something, either it be from a family perspective, philanthropic, or just getting to a level of security that they don't have today. And I just enjoy doing that.
That makes a lot of sense. And we've talked on this podcast before about investment theses, and that investors, they don't just blindly, you get pitched a lot. Like, how many times a year do you get pitched?
Oh, how many times a day? Good question. I guess I could get a pitch quota in, so I can still get the rest of my job done.
So you can't say yes to everything. Even if you want to say yes, you simply can't do it. Like, how many investments would you make in a year or in a few years?
Yeah. So in terms of investment pace, for me it really is dictated by the fund size. And largely the way a lot of our investors think about things is that a venture investor can manage during any given, we call a period of investment for a fund, about $50 million worth of capital. And so we think about the amount of investments that a partner could handle at any given point in time. And depending upon who you talk to, you think about maybe like 10 to 15 boards or investments that you've sponsored. And so for me, it translates logically to about 2.25 investments a year or something like that. I don't know how you do a quarter of an investment, but on the average, it sort of works out to be that way. But in terms of thesis, how I and my team, how we think about things is when we look at a company and we ask ourselves, is this a class of product? Are they making a class of product that most businesses will need one of. And we say most businesses, we don't mean really small to medium enterprise. We think about organizations with say 1,000 people and up, because those are the folks that start to have an IT budget. Mm-hmm. So we say, okay, if you have 1,000 people and up, do you need one of these? Mm-hmm. And whatever one of those is. So there are some pretty good real world examples today. Well, if you have 1,000 people and up, you probably have some sort of file servers, whether you own them or you lease them or they're cloud hosted on your behalf. You probably have inside the house email, an email with your domain on it, whether you're getting it from a hoster or you're getting it from somewhere else, or you have your own Exchange servers. You have spreadsheets, you have word processors, you have presentation software, you use a web browser, you have laptops, you have desktops, you have routers, and so these are all like the basics of business. And then you kind of click up once from there and you say, okay, every one of those companies probably has an expense management system, they probably have a CRM, they have customers, they may have a marketing automation system, they probably have some database that they keep stuff in. Whether they know it or not, because they might have bought an application that actually stores stuff in a database for them. And so what just talked about here is sort of like what really happened in the 90s, client-server computing, people had databases, what ERP systems. There was a rise of companies like SAP and the database companies like Microsoft and Oracle and Sybase and Informix. And so we think about now where we sit for the next 15 years, what are the sets of products that everyone will have one of? So things are different now. So we think about things like hybrid cloud. We think about things like big data and NoSQL. We think about the application layers that will ride on top of those. We think about mobility and how enterprises need to be mobile and provide applications to their own employees and to their customers. And so so our thesis very much revolves around a breadth thesis, and it's very much a global thesis. It's not just a US thesis. And so we think about businesses of all sizes around the world. And so those are the kind of things that we fund.
Yeah.
And they're not easy to find either, because a lot of entrepreneurs don't think that way.
That's absolutely true. What kind of mindset does it take to think that way?
Yeah, I think,
background. What do you need to know as an entrepreneur to kind of get into that kind of space?
Right. So what we see are people that are people that have worked at large companies, but were really entrepreneurial in nature. Maybe they came out of university and then worked at a large company and had the opportunity to witness firsthand something that went around the world and really what it takes and what it means, and use that time wisely to engage with that company's customers. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not to say that you can't just have a great idea and it goes crazy from an enterprise software perspective, because it can happen, but being able to have access to those customers and understand the difference between a person that's willing to fork over money and pay for something, as opposed to a small to medium enterprise or an individual consumer that will largely try to use something for free and stay on free as long as they can. And so a little bit of time at a large organization to understand how it works, but then there's a fine line. Because if you stay there too long, then you become known as a big company person, and you don't want to be that either.
Yeah.
So I think doing a few years at a name brand company is definitely helpful.
Great. What do most founders like? I know a lot of founders that are trying to start enterprise software companies. What's kind of the misconception there? I know a lot of founders that think, well, I can start a company that will do invoicing, mm-hmm. and I'll sell invoicing to enterprises because they're big and they'll pay lots of money. What does it take to build an enterprise software company? Yeah, so enterprises, and we talk about enterprises here, we generally mean when someone would think of a company, the number I use is 1,000 to 1,500 employees. Someone with a dedicated IT staff once you get to that level. And I think what people miss, entrepreneurs and also plenty of people that work inside of larger organizations, is that what a customer is really looking for is for your company to be a trusted advisor in the domain, right? So let's look at an example like Workday, right? People buy Workday. Workday is a great product. But people don't simply buy Workday because it's good at what it does. They buy Workday because the folks at Workday really understand what human capital is about, right? So you're buying a human capital management system and trusted advice embodied in the software. So it's just not transactions about recording things and what have you.
And if you look really across the board, so why do people buy operating systems from just a few companies? They want the advice, not just implementing, not just assuming that the operating system is going to work. That's table stakes, but they're buying advice around implementation, about guidance, about how the operating system should be used, and things like that. And it's super important to understand that, like, for even as us, we might, like, as individuals, we'll buy things, and we're not going to say, oh, we expect trusted advice from our cloud files, our cloud Dropbox provider, right, to tell us how we should be using it. We're just happy to have it and put our files there, and we move on.
And trusted advice is more than just like a blog post. It's not like self-service. This is actually high touch, right?
Correct. So there's an element of conversation. Typically takes salespeople, right, on the ground. Eventually, customers do want to have that essential line of sight, and there are long-term relationships. And so when a customer is going to make a bet on your product, they're not making a bet that they're going to use it for 6 months. If they're going to put in a new system, you're talking 7, 8, 10, 15 years. You have to show durability and that willingness to put your own skin in the game.
Yeah, a lot of enterprise software CEOs that I know are constantly on planes flying to sit with customers and build relationships with people that they've known for decades. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like the low touch, like SASE sort of SMB sort of software. It's a different kind of DNA.
Yeah, it's a different DNA and a different sale and a different relationship. So you can say, look at some large SaaS properties today, Workday and Salesforce. I mean, I can guarantee you that the CEOs of those companies sit with customers multiple times per day.
Yep. Yeah.
Live, not on a chat.
Yeah.
So face to face is important. And the reason why that happens is the customer wants to believe that you're smarter than they are about a thing. Mm-hmm. And so what they're effectively doing is they're transferring risk and transferring, I say research and development, but it's also an intellectual capacity to you as the vendor. And they do desire that. Now, there are things that they know about their business, about their core business, that you, the entrepreneur, will probably never be as good at as them, right? So don't try to wade into that either.
Yep. And that can be 9 months of you flying and spending time with those people before they even pay you, right?
Yes, the classic enterprise sales cycle. We'd hope that we can shrink it in from 9 months, but yeah, I would say 6 months could be typical.
I've also heard this from entrepreneurs that they think, well, we can do a land and expand where we kind of get the people on the ground and then it'll naturally turn into a bigger sale. Is that myth or is that real?
So there are elements of what we call the grassroots adoption here, or consumerized adoption, to create a groundswell for something. But by and large, once the company has decided it is going to standardize, and that's where the revenue really starts to flow, they will want a direct relationship with you. So it's a pretty rare occasion where you can do it all via grassroots adoption. Even look at, so I guess a good example is like VMware. So VMware in the 90s had two products. It had one called GSX and one called ESX. And GSX was the workstation product, and the GS stood for groundswell. ESX meant elastic sky. So the GSX product ran on your workstation. As a developer or a systems engineer, you install that on your own, and suddenly VMware kind of proliferated around the organization. But no top-level buy was really done based on GSX. The top-level buy was based on ESX. And ESX was by definition not something that an IT pro can carry around their laptop. It required a server, it was not a type 2 hypervisor, it was a type 1. So to the extent that GSX planted the seeds for that was great, and it established momentum, but then the top-level buy came in on something completely different.
Makes sense. So if you're going to be doing enterprise sales and enterprise software, you should expect, part of the job is expected to really be high touch, really build deep relationships, not just broad. Like a consumer play like Facebook, you've got millions of users. Like, you've got to really focus in, really spend time, build a deep relationship, add a lot of value, and expect it to take 9 months before you even see the first paycheck.
Yeah, so in terms of the time it's going to take, the relationship build is super important, especially in the early days. And that then once you establish those relationships, some interesting things will happen. So that person you've established a relationship and made your first sale, your first big sale, like you said, it might take 9 months. Over time, that person will probably go work somewhere else.
Yeah.
And when they do go work somewhere else, then that next sale is not going to take 9 months. It's probably going to take, it might take an hour if they don't have your product already. And the other thing is, by establishing that relationship as that trusted advisor, your customers will speak to their cohort. Because no one wants to be alone. So if I'm using a product, I want other people to use it because it makes the product better and it makes the company stronger. So yeah, so early days it's going to be really long, but also in general, the bigger the ticket, the longer it will take. And so you'll be able to calibrate things around so many things like land and expand, or at least a starter small. Understanding how much budget the customer has and not going for the whole thing all at once is also helpful.
Makes sense. So let's pick a little bit of a different topic, which is, how do you pick startup ideas either to join or found or to invest in?
Yeah, so when I was working at companies and thinking about joining a startup, for me, like one of the most important things when I was thinking about going at a place to work, as an example, was like, do I add value? I always ask myself the question, how does this company benefit from my existence? And if I couldn't really have a good answer to that question, it would be a quick disqualification. But if I knew I can fill an immediate need based on some domain knowledge or some relationships that I had, then I know I can add value, again, either as an employee or as an advisor. And believe it or not, even now when I think about making investments, when I look at a company to invest in addition to the other filters in the thesis, I at least have to believe that I'm going to add some sort of value. Because it would make for like a very uninteresting board meeting if I don't understand a word that the company is saying, or I can't really help.
Yeah.
And so for me, my value add is super important there. And and also we look for patterns around things that people are willing to pay for, right? And just blowing things out where you get a lot of usage but really have no chance ever at monetization because no one's ever paid for it, those are questionable things.
What do founders get wrong when picking their startup ideas?
Yeah, so I think we've seen a lot of this in the past. So when startups, sometimes an entrepreneur can be a victim of a false signal, and so that might have been something like a large outcome, in a space, and so they say, oh wow, so there's one buyer for something like that. There must be 10 buyers for something like that, and I'm gonna go start one of those things because I know I can get bought, and therefore I'll get venture capital to come follow me. So following the false signal and interpreting the false signal, I think is a big issue.
Yeah.
And then
is that kind of like in Peter Thiel's book 0 to 1 that just came out? He talks about thinking about first principles over Me Too, and working from first principles instead of trying to follow trends. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, it is. Understanding about your idea and what you want to build. Is what I'm building something that's urgent and necessary? Okay, I believe it is. How do I describe it as being urgent and necessary? Well, that's called marketing, right? If you can't make that description, then that's a real issue. I would think also another thing is really understanding that you're not building a product for yourself, and too many people fall into that trap. So you see too many people now, or over time, building things for developers because they are developers, and then the market never emerges. And then people scratch their heads and say, why aren't people just paying for these things? I don't understand. And then finally, I think not really understanding what the total market is for what you're trying to do. So just the fact that there's a lot of noise about something doesn't mean there's actually a lot of money to be made in it.
Yes.
And so we see people make those mistakes all the time.
Got it. One last question. What is it about startups that excites you? What motivates you? What is it about it that you're, and what makes you want to help other startups?
Yeah. So for me, it's like the thing about working with startups is that every day is different, and some days are good, some days are bad, but every day is different, and just the excitement about being part of the success, right? So participating in the high, and then also being help to manage the low. So those are the things that really excite me. And finally, the benefit of it is for someone like me is I get to be around the smartest people I ever meet. And so when you go choose, if you're going to choose a great team, they're going to be smart people by definition. And being around smart people, I think it's the number one benefit of the job.
Awesome. Well, it really means a lot that you've let me pick your brain, and it means a lot to my audience and our audience. So I appreciate your time, and great to see you.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for listening to the Craftsman Founder Podcast with Lucas Carlson. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, craftsmanfounder.com, to your friends and colleagues. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a Craftsman Founder production. Join us next time for another edition of the Craftsman Founder Podcast.